Depends on how it goes. Depends on how you feel, to be honest. All right, chapter 13, Castles in the Air. Now, before we read the chapter, Castles in the Air is referring to someone's almost like their dream or their goal. Okay, kind of like how when you're younger, people always ask you, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Okay, that's kind of like your castle in the air. This place that you really hope exists, and if you could create a perfect world, it would be in this way. Okay, that's what a castle in the air is. So in this chapter, we're gonna learn what each girl's castle in the air, quote unquote, would be their ideal or perfect world. If they could reach any goal or accomplish any dream, what would that be? Does that make sense? All right. Castles in the air. Laurie lay swinging to and fro in his hammock one warm September afternoon. He was in one of his moods, for the day had been both unprofitable and unsatisfactory. He was staring up into the horse chestnut trees above him, daydreaming about an ocean voyage around the world, when the sound of voices brought him back ashore in a flash. Peeping through the meshes of the hammock, he saw the marches coming out, as if bound on some expedition. What in the world are those girls about now? Thought Laurie, opening his sleepy eyes to take a good look, for their appearance was rather peculiar. Each of them wore a large flopping hat, a brown linen pouch slung over one shoulder, and carried a long staff. Meg had a cushion, Joe a book, Beth a basket, and Amy a portfolio, like a drawing book, basically. All walked quietly through the garden, out at the little back gate, and began to climb the hill that lay between the house and the river. Well, that's cool, said Laurie to himself, to have a picnic and never ask me. I'll take after them and see just what's going on. Do they know that Laurie is coming too? No, he's going to kind of spy on them. It took him some time to find a hat, so that the girls were quite out of sight when he leaped the fence and ran after them. He ran to the boathouse, but no one was there, and he went up the hill to take an observation. Peeping through the bushes, Laurie saw a rather pretty little picture. The sisters sat together in the shady nook. Meg was seated upon her cushion, sewing daintily with her white hand, and looking as fresh and sweet as a rose in her pink dress. Beth was sorting the pine cones that lay thick under the hemlock nearby, for she liked to make pretty things with them. Amy was sketching a group of ferns, and Jo was knitting socks as she read aloud. A shadow passed over the boy's face as he watched them. Okay, you have to understand, when someone says a shadow passed over their face, it doesn't necessarily mean a literal shadow, but the idea is their face goes from being kind of normal to being upset. And you can kind of visibly see them getting upset, as if a shadow were passing over. Does that make sense? A dark kind of feeling passes over them. Yes?
So it's like, everyone's fine and I'm supposed to be invited. They're trying to have fun.
Yes. He's feeling a little left out. He's like, whoa, we do everything together. Why are they doing this without me and not inviting me? A shadow passed over the boy's face as he watched them, feeling that he ought to go away because he was uninvited. Suddenly, Beth looked up, spied his wistful face behind the birches, and beckoned him with a reassuring smile, kind of like this. Come on, it's okay. May I come in, please? Or shall I be a bother? He asked, advancing slowly. Meg lifted her eyebrows, kind of like, I don't think so. But Jo scowled at her and said at once, Of course you may. We should have asked you before, only we thought you wouldn't care for such a girls' game as this. Well, I always like your games, but if Meg doesn't want me, I'll go away. I mean, I've no objection if you do something. It's against the rules to be idle out here, replied Meg, gravely but graciously. Much obliged. Shall I sew, read, cone, draw, or do all of them at once? I'm ready. And Laurie sat down with a submissive expression that delighted the girls. Okay, what's the one rule? If he's going to join their little game, what's the one rule he has to follow? Aiden? He has to be doing something. No one sitting there just wasting time or being idle. Finish this story while I knit the heel, said Joe, handing him the book. Yes'm, he answered meekly, and did his best to prove his gratitude for the favor of admission into the Busy Bee Society. All right. Have you ever heard someone use the phrase busy bees? Oh, what a bunch of busy bees. Okay.
No.
So the phrase is generally used to describe someone who is busy all the time. They're constantly doing something. Bees are very busy. Worker bees, right? They are very, very busy. They're constantly harvesting honey. They're flying around. They never stop. They never just sit and chill. Okay? The Busy Bee Society then is kind of like a club where all of the members are busy. They're all doing work. They're all occupying their time by doing something productive. Okay? The story was not a long one, and when it was finished, he ventured to ask a few questions. Please, ma'am, could I inquire if this highly instructive and charming institution is a new one? Basically asking in a playful way. Is this a new game of y'all's, or do y'all play this often? Oh, didn't we tell you this new plan of ours? Asked Joe. Well, we have tried not to waste our holiday, but each of us has worked at a task. The vacation is nearly over, and we are ever so glad that we didn't dawdle. What does the word dawdle mean? Jaime? Good. To poke along or waste time. Yes, I should think so. And Lori thought regretfully of his own idle days. Mother likes to have us out of doors as much as possible, so we bring our work out here and have nice times. For the fun of it, we bring our things in these bags. We wear old hats, and we use poles to climb the hill, play pilgrims, as we used to do years ago, Joe explained. We call this hill the Delectable Mountain, for we can look far away and see the country where we hope to live sometime. Joe pointed, and Lori sat up to examine, for through an opening in the woods one could look across the wide blue river, far over the outskirts of the great city, to the green hills that rose to meet the gold and purple splendor of an autumn sunset. Okay? So to kind of imagine they're on this hill, they're looking out into the distance, and they see this beautiful countryside way off in the distance. And Joe says that's where we want to live one day. We hope we make enough money to buy a house out there and live out there. Rising high into the ruddy light were silvery white peaks that shone like the airy spires of some celestial city. So really beautiful, almost like mountain scenery. Wow, how beautiful that is, said Laurie softly, for he was quick to see and feel beauty of any kind. We like to watch it, for it is never the same, but always splendid, replied Amy, wishing she could paint it. Joe talked about the country where we hope to live sometime. The real country, with pigs and chickens and haymaking. It would be nice, but I wish the beautiful country up there was real, and we could ever go to it, said Beth musingly, looking up at the sky. Wouldn't it be fun if all the castles in the air which we make could come true, and that we could live in them? Said Joe, after a little pause. Is Joe talking about a real castle here? No, but imagining kind of their dreamland almost. Oh, I've made such quantities of them it would be hard to choose which one I'd have, said Lori, lying flat and throwing cones. Well, what is your favorite one? Asked Meg. Well, after I had seen as much of the world as I want to, I'd like to settle in Germany and be a famous musician. And all creation will rush to hear me play. And I'm never to be bothered about money or business, but just enjoy myself and live for whatever I like. That's my favorite castle. What's yours, Meg? What is Laurie's dream? If he could have his way with anything in the world, what would he do? Sophie? And become a what? What kind of job does he want? Sadiksha? A famous musician. He wants to move to Germany and be a famous musician and not have to worry about money or working or business. Does it sound like Laurie wants to go into business like his grandfather? No. That's what his grandfather wants him to do. It's probably the smart thing for him to do. But in his heart, He wants to be a musician, which may not make as much money, but that's what he would enjoy doing. Meg seemed to find it a little hard to tell about hers, and waved a fan before her face as she said slowly, "Well, I should like to have a lovely house, full of all sorts of luxurious things. Nice food, pretty clothes, handsome furniture, pleasant people, and heaps of money. I'd like to have plenty of servants, so I never need to work even a bit. Oh, how I should enjoy it! For I wouldn't be idle, but I would do good, and make everyone love me dearly." "Well, wouldn't you have a master for your castle in the air?" asked Laurie slyly. Why is he asking this slyly? What would be the master of her house? Don't you want to have a master in your castle in the air? Chloe? Don't you want to have a husband to rule that castle with you? "Well, I said pleasant people." And Meg carefully tied up her shoe as she spoke so that no one saw her face. "Why don't you say you'd have a splendid, wise, good husband and some angelic little children? You know your castle wouldn't be perfect without that," said blunt Joe, who scorned romance except for in books. "Well, you'd have nothing but horses and inkstands and novels in yours," answered Meg petulantly. Well, listen to what Joe says. "Oh, wouldn't I, though? I'd have a stable full of Arabian steeds, rooms piled high with books, and I'd write out of a magic inkstand so that my works would be as famous as Laurie's music. I want to do something splendid, something heroic or wonderful that won't be forgotten after I'm dead. I don't know what, but I'm on the watch for it, and I mean to astonish you all some day. I think I shall write books and get rich and famous. Yeah, that would suit me. So that is my favorite dream." Meg's like, "Well, you would just want to have horses and books in yours." She's like, "Yeah, I would. Absolutely. That'd be great." All right, and here's Beth. Here's Beth. "Mine is to stay at home, safe with father and mother, and help take care of the family," said Beth contentedly. "Don't you wish for anything else?" asked Laurie. "Well, since I have my little piano, I am perfectly satisfied. I only wish that we may all keep well and be together and nothing else."
Very unselfish.
"Oh, yeah, very unselfish. Very good. Oh, I have ever so many wishes, but my pet one is to be an artist and go to Rome and do fine pictures and be the best artist in the whole world," was Amy's modest desire. Was Amy's desire really a modest one?
What does modest mean?
Modest means like humbled. You don't want much. She just wants everything. It's it's a sarcastic way of saying she was not being modest.
Oh.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Said it is with Amy's modest desire, like she's asking for the whole world, basically. Yes.
My sister kind of like that. She's very like, yeah, I'm gonna be a drawer. I'm gonna draw over the walls, and she was like,
Oh.
poor walls.
Well, we're an ambitious set, aren't we? Every one of us, well, except for Beth, wants to be rich and famous and gorgeous in every respect. I do wonder if any of us will ever get our wishes, said Laurie, chewing a blade of grass. Well, if we're all alive 10 years hence, let's meet up and see how many of us have gotten our wishes, or how much nearer to them we are than now, said Joe, always ready with a plan. "Oh, bless me! How old I shall be then! I'll be 27!" exclaimed Meg, who felt grown up already, having just reached 17. "You and I will be 26, Teddy." What is Teddy? Read that superscript down below. Wyatt? 149. Yes. Okay. Laurie's real name is Theodore Lawrence. He hates the name Theodore, so he tells everyone to call him Laurie. Well, Joe, as kind of like her, they're like BFFs, right? She's kind of made her own nickname for him, and she's the only one in the world that calls him Teddy. Okay, which is like Teddy Roosevelt, who was named Theodore Roosevelt. Mhm. Teddy is to Theodore like uh, Rob is to Robert, or Joe is to Joseph, or Meg is for Margaret. Elizabeth. Yeah. When he was, yeah, they called him Dora like to make fun of him, which is why he wanted everyone to call him Lori. Good question. You and I will be 26 by then, Teddy. Beth 24 and Amy 22, said Joe. No, she'll be. It's 10 years down the road. She's 12.
I'm 7. Oh wait, I just turned 17. What?
I hope I shall have done something to be proud of by that time, but I'm such a lazy dog. I'm afraid I shall dawdle, Joe. Well, you need a motive, Mother says, and when you get it, she is sure you'll work splendidly. Is she? Oh, by Jupiter, I will, if I only get the chance, cried Laurie, stirring up with sudden energy. I ought to be satisfied just to please grandfather, and I do try to, but he wants me to be an India merchant, as he was, and I'd rather be shot. I hate tea and silk and spices, and every sort of rubbish his old ship brings. Going to college ought to satisfy him, but he's set, and I've got to do just as he did. If there was anyone left to stay with the old gentleman, I'd just break away and please myself as my father did. Interesting. What is the only reason Laurie does not leave his grandfather and go do it? Because he's almost an adult now. He's about to go to college. What's the only reason he refuses to go off and follow his dream of being a musician? Layla? Good. He's the only member left of his family to take care of his grandfather. And he loves him enough to not want him to be by himself. So he's giving up his dream and doing what his grandfather wants him to do and being an Indian merchant. Okay? Laurie spoke excitedly, ready to carry out his threat, for he had a young man's restless longing to try the world for himself. I advise you to sail away in one of your ships and never come home again until you have tried your own way, said Joe, whose imagination was fired up by the thought of such a daring exploit. She's like, yeah, you should try it. Now, Meg, being a little more mature, that's not right, Joe. You mustn't talk in that way, and Laurie mustn't take your bad advice. You should do just what your grandfather wishes, my dear boy, said Meg in her most maternal tone. As you say, there is no one else to stay with and love him, and you'd never forgive yourself if you left him. Don't fret, but do your duty, and you'll get your reward, as good Mr. Brooke has, by being respected and loved. What do you know about him? Asked Laurie, grateful for the good advice, but objecting to the lecture. Oh, only what your grandpa's told us about him, how he took good care of his own mother until she died, and wouldn't go abroad as a tutor because he didn't want to leave her, and how he provides now for an old woman who nursed his mother, and never tells anyone about it, but is just as generous and patient and good as he can be. So he is, dear old fellow, said Laurie heartily as Meg paused, looking flushed and earnest with her story. You know, it's just like Grandpa to tell all his goodness to others so that they might like him. If I ever do get my wish, you see what I'll do for Brooke. Okay? So, this is actually kind of sweet, right? Mr. Brooke he took care of his mother until his mother died. We don't know what from. But he now, as a tutor, he doesn't make a lot of money. He's like a teacher. Okay? But what he does make, he still gives some of that money to the woman who took care of his nurse, or to the nurse who took care of his mother as she was dying, even though he doesn't have to, and he doesn't tell anyone. Why would he not tell anyone? Because he doesn't want to do what? Wyatt? Brag. He doesn't want to brag about it. Okay? So Mr. Brooke really is a good guy. And Laurie says, oh, just wait. If I get rich one day, you see what kind of good stuff I do for Mr. Brooke. Me, like, as in he makes his own money. Sophie?
Last year, he was like, I want to be a firefighter. And then the year before that, he was like, I want to be a policeman. The year before that, he was like, I want to be, I don't know what I want to be. This year, he's like, what I want to do, I want to be a superhero and save the world.
I love it. That's right. Love that. Guys? Well, you can begin to do something now by not plaguing his life out, said Meg sharply. As in, he probably thinks we just behaved him a little better. How do you know I do, miss? Oh, I can always tell by Mr. Brooks' face when he goes away. If you've been good, he looks satisfied and walks briskly. But if you've plagued him, he's sober and walks slowly, as if he wanted to go back and do his work better. So, you keep track? You keep an account of my good and bad marks in Brooks' face, do you? I see him smile and bow as he passes by your window, but I didn't know you got up a telegraph with him. We haven't. Oh, don't be angry, and oh, don't tell him I said anything. What is said here is said in confidence, cried Meg, much alarmed. Why is she freaking out?
I don't know. Can you tell me?
Huh?
Can you tell me?
Why is she freaking out, Caleb? Yeah, she's like, oh, don't tell him I was saying all these good things about him. Please, I'd be so embarrassed. Don't tell him what I said. Oh, I don't tell tales, replied Lori, with his high and mighty air, as Joe called it. Please don't be offended. We feel as if you were like our brother, and we just say what we think. Forgive me, I really meant it kindly. And Meg offered her hand with a gesture both affectionate and timid. She was kind of getting on to Lori for his behavior, and now she's like, so sorry. I really think of you as a brother. I was just picking on you. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to be rude. Blah, blah, blah. Ashamed of his momentary pique, Lori squeezed the kind little hand and said frankly, I'm the one to be forgiven. I've been out of sorts all day. I like to have you tell me my faults and to be sisterly, so don't mind if I'm grumpy sometimes. I thank you all the same. Bent on showing that he was not at all offended, he made himself as agreeable as possible until the faint sound of a bell warned the party that it was time to get home to supper. May I come again? Asked Lori. Yes, only if you are good and attend to your books, said Meg, smiling. Okay, I'll try. That night, when Beth played to Mr. Lawrence in the twilight, Lori, standing in the shadow of the curtain, listened and watched the old man who sat with his gray head on his hand, thinking tender thoughts of the dead child he had loved so much. Remembering the conversation of the afternoon, the boy said to himself, I'll let my castle go, and I'll stay with the dear old gentleman while he needs me, for I am all he has. Why does Lori decide to put his dream on hold? Stop. Why does Lori decide, I'll just put my dream on hold for now? Amy? Because? Very good. He's like, he's sitting there watching Mr. Lawrence as he is listening to Beth with his hand in his head, clearly thinking of the dead child that Beth reminds him of, right? And he's like, and he starts to feel bad. Get it? He starts to feel bad. He says, you know what? I'll put my dream on hold. I'm the only family he has left, and I'm not going to do that to him. Okay? Pretty sweet of Lori. Yes.